Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My heart's on the left side of my body. Why am I the crazy one? There's no rational way to start this. So I'll just start from the beginning and try my best to make you understand where I'm coming from. Please, if there's anyone who doesn't think I'm crazy, please reach out. Please tell me I'm sane and the whole world's crazy, please. My name is Martin Alberstrand. I turned 54 in October, and last week I had a heart attack. I guess that's where I should start, the day of the heart attack. I'm sure you wouldn't like to hear about my riveting career as a postal clerk at a mid-sized processing facility, or about my kids who seem to have lost my cell number, or my wife, who has felt like a sister rather than a partner for the last 15-ish years. I bore even myself with my life. God knows what it would do to you people. It was 8:15 in the morning, the same time I've woken up every day for the last 30 years. I'd seen that clock on my bedside table reading 8:15, more than I think I had seen my children's faces. Most people just feel dread about something like that. I don't. I see dependability. I see something that's unchanging. Every day, anything can be different. Anything could change, but not that clock, not time. I woke up and grabbed the robe my wife laid out on the foot of our bed. I lazily slung my arms into sleeves and tied the sash around my waist. As I walked downstairs, I smelled fresh coffee and bacon. Doctors have been telling me to lower my cholesterol, but I always told my wife, I'd rather die with a steak in my mouth than live with chickpeas and lentils. That's more or less what happened that morning. It starts like indigestion, a dull pressure in the chest, but it grows heavier, like an anvil crushing you from the inside. The pain spreads your arm, your jaw, hot and sharp, while sweat pours down your skin. You can't catch your breath. Your heart stutters, misfires, and it's after all this that it hits you that something is terribly wrong. The room blurs, sound fades, and you clutch at your chest, struck by a terrifying certainty that your own body has turned against you. My wife started dialing 911 the moment I hit the ground. I remember resenting her for not dialing sooner. I don't remember much after it. Not coherently enough to transcribe it at least. I remember paramedics vaguely being hauled onto a stretcher and the hospital lights moving quickly in and out of my perception as I was hurried into a room I couldn't name. Machines beeped insistently. Hands touched me. Voices spoke too quickly, too urgently. I tried to answer, tried to speak, but all that came out was a garbled rasp. Once I was stable and of conscious mind, a doctor made his way into the room to give me the rundown. He tells me the basics, that they caught it in time, that I'm stable, and I need to be monitored closely for the next couple of days. The days went by staying in the hospital. My wife and I didn't talk a lot, but she never left my side. If the roles were reversed, I would have never left hers. A lot was wrong with our marriage, but our attachment to each other was never one of them. She was there just as my heart was in my chest. The doctor came in and greeted me and my wife. He asked a few questions, told me that I'm about good to go, and just had a few more boxes to check off. He turned his attention away from me and began speaking to his nurses. He turned back to me and requested an x-ray of my heart. I, of course, obliged and had the x-ray taken. As I was waiting for the results, my wife was grabbing my hand tightly. It felt foreign, but I welcomed it. I don't know if she was just doing it to offer support, or she might have thought she lost me and was grateful I'm not dead. I'd like to think the latter. We've been in a romantic-less relationship for as long as we've been romantic. But I remember how we used to be. It was nice to remember. Maybe if things hadn't turned out how they did that day, we might have finally addressed things and repaired our broken marriage. Suddenly, I feel her grip tighten up. I turn my head to look at her face, and she's mortified. I ask her what's wrong, and she doesn't reply. I follow her eyes and I see the x-ray technician's face. The look in his eyes still haunts me. Any look other than a blank stare would be extremely concerning, but his face was a different story. I saw his eyes roam the obscured x-ray chart with unmistakable horror and unprecedented confusion. I just stared blankly and reflected on my life. Did I have any regrets? Not particularly. But did I have any remorse that my existence was marching toward a much sooner than expected end? No, I didn't. The x-ray tech finally pulls himself together and runs out of the room, most likely in search of the doctor. I held my wife's hand tightly and lied to her. I told her everything would be okay, that I would be okay. I think it was okay to lie in that situation. The lie was to protect her, not me. I told her I was sorry for being the man I was, for not loving her how I should. Maybe that was a mistake, because as soon as the words left my mouth, she became a fully incoherent mess of sobs. The x-ray tech brings a doctor and a few nurses back to the room. They huddled around the chart, each of them going pale. The doctor's reaction was the one I was looking for. He was clearly a very composed man. You have to be in a field like this. He sees horrors and tragedies daily that are beyond my comprehension. That's why his slack-jawed expression felt like a dagger in my heart. Finally finishing off my suspicions, he just stared at it. They all mumbled amongst themselves, loud enough that I could comprehend they were panicked, but not loud enough that I could hear them clearly. I hugged my wife and lied to her again. The doctor approached us solemnly. I just asked what came to my mind. Is it cancer? Clogged valves? Blood clots? Is any of it treatable? He waits until the words have fully left my mouth before he replies stoically. Mr. Alberstrand, there's not only no easy way to put this, there is no way at all to put this. It's your heart. I awaited my death sentence. The doctor patiently said, It's on the left side of your body, Mr. Alberstrand. While I gave him a look of utter confusion, my inconsolable wife excused herself immediately. At this point, I'm full of relief and rage. Is this a joke? I spat out with venom. The doctor gives a look of understanding, like I'm in denial, and he's having to get the severity of the matter across. Except I don't see an ounce of severity in the situation. I humor him and allow him to continue, without launching into a tirade. I'm still anxiously awaiting him to drop a bomb. He says, I know this is, how do I say this, irregular, Mr. Alberstrand, but it isn't just your heart. It's everything. Stomach, pancreas, spleen, right lobe of the liver, descending colon. It's all on the left side of your body and vice versa. I saw your medical chart. You have no health conditions that I could find that this might have affected, so the heart attack could be unrelated. At this point, now that he's fully gotten the point across, I'm really relieved and really pissed. You just scared my wife half to death to tell me my heart's on the left side of my body? Who the hell do you think you are? What bomb are you going to drop next? That I have two eyes and a nose? All while you gossip with your nurses like I have a clogged artery in front of my wife. I'm fully worked up now. Given my heart attack 3 days prior, this was probably an unwise reaction. The doctor is shocked by my reaction, somehow even more dumbfounded than when he saw my chart. I don't think you're understanding the severity of this. I'm going to print off a copy of this chart for you to take home. You seem to be fine, and on paper, this condition shouldn't affect you directly. I would just highly recommend you take this to a cardiothoracic surgeon, maybe even a human anatomist. I'm too confused by the situation to provide a retort. He's already getting up and walking toward the door anyway, so I let him leave without asking any more questions. I didn't go to college, but I took a biology class in high school. The heart is on the left side, the pancreas and spleen on the left side. Why is that so insane? My wife and I drove home in silence. I couldn't get a read on how she was feeling, but I knew that she was too confused and scared to be questioned. The doctor said I should be fine, you know? Aside from the kook bullshit about my organs being on the side they're supposed to be, he seemed to think everything else is under control. I might have to slow down on the bacon though. Honey, she didn't speak. She almost did, but she had this face of annoyance at me. The fact that I'm so calm about all this is more disturbing than whatever she's disturbed about. We creep into our driveway, and she doesn't waste any time getting out of the car. I follow her into the house. Will you just talk to me? Why are you being like this? I'm healthy. Healthy? She incredulously spat out. Your heart is on your left side, Martin. I'm confused and annoyed. Damn it, honey, not you too? What the hell do you mean my heart's on the left side? That's where it's always been. Yours too. I tried to hide it, but I was scared. Either I'd gone insane or the doctors, the nurses, the x-ray technicians, and my own wife were all crazy. I don't know which was worse. While I'm zoned out thinking about this, she pulled out the chart the doctor printed off. The doctor also printed a standard sample x-ray. She held them both up right in my face. Martin, something is wrong here, and something is wrong with you for not acknowledging it. I just stared at the two charts. Each one is a mirror image of the other. It's been a few days since then. I don't know what's real. All I know is that I am not crazy. I remember laying my head down on my wife's chest, hearing her heartbeat, feeling her heartbeat. It was on the left side of her chest. That's just how it's always been. It can't be any other way. I refuse to let it be any other way. I haven't spoken to my wife since she showed me the charts. I've tried searching for anyone who remembers a heart being on the left side, anyone sane like me, but there's not a single result. So I came here. I just need someone to say I'm not crazy. Just one. Story 2. I want to help. Dear gentle people, I've spent a significant amount of time on this subreddit over the past couple years, and by God have people done some stupid shit. I am here to help through familiar relations, a knack for finding places, and things I shouldn't and talents considered unnatural by some I know stuff. And I am here to share my knowledge with you. All the stories we've read here are based on the fact that reality is actually quite weak, and once it starts slipping, it almost never stops. People don't know how to stop it. I am here to hopefully teach some of the more clever ones here what to do. First things first, follow the damn rules. Almost all the run-of-the-mill reality fuckery follows certain rules, and specific circumstances warp reality, which allows some rules to lose efficacy. However, humans being humans, we tend to find out the new rules by trial and error, often involving some better him than me sacrifice. And when we follow these things work out fine, giving us the list stories we are all familiar with. The best outcome is usually survival by having followed the rules. The way to fix a clusterfuck like this is to re-establish reality by introducing more, stronger observers. This is difficult because situations like this tend to attract people who are already slipping down the drain and are less bound to reality than most. Yes, the people who get in these situations are less real than most, definitely less real than me and my companions. Probably not that much worse off than you, unfortunately. Your best bet is to restore your own reality simply by interacting more. Crawl out of your hole and find people in normal places. Whatever you do, don't go to that shady, secretive rave you've heard of and probably got invited to. I guarantee you nobody there is on the right side of the reality collapse you're sinking into. Go grocery shopping when it's busy. Stand in line in a coffee shop during rush hour and interact with normal people doing normal things. A sense of isolation is one of the first things you will notice before shit breaks down. Second, and already touched upon, assert your reality. Reality is fragile and drags things down with it. A good example is the US nowadays. It's simply too big to have enough observers everywhere in order to keep things from going to shit. Ghost towns abound where a handful of people live. If you come from one of these small towns, you'll be able to tell. When you reach a new place, one close to being fully real, you'll notice a number of things. The air feels fresher. Breathing is like drinking that first sip of water after a long, warm day. The weather feels more committed. No vague dreariness or exhaustive, lifeless heat, but cold, biting rain. Burning sun you feel deep in your bones. Wind that buffets you instead of isolating you. You yourself will feel more aware, as if you finally woke up after a slow, early morning. Not the sudden jolt of caffeine, but actual awareness. And you will remember. You'll remember all the little things you failed to notice because you were slowly becoming less an observer, less real in your dilapidated town circling the drain. The man without a shadow, the mother with an empty stroller, the lady with twins that have been the same age for years now, the dog that doesn't actually look like any kind of dog you've ever heard of, The lack of insects in the day-to-day. The overabundance of pests that invade your house. No ants in the garden, no bees in the field. Flies and cockroaches in your bed and kitchen. The childhood friend you've helped move away, but who never left or returned unnoticed. Failing to assert his reality in a place a few rungs up the ladder. Who walks around blank-faced and unseeing gaze. He's farther down the hole than you are. I don't think he could be salvaged, but you just might. Third, avoid slipping away. Don't take the fucking night gig. The moment someone tells you, I have a lucrative graveyard shift job, there's just some rules to follow. Turn around and walk away. And if it's your childhood buddy with his blank stare, run. When you see a building or entrance that shouldn't be, don't go in, not one step. It might seem like a small thing. After all, what's one step into the darkness? But it's an enormous leap from a reality standpoint. It's a deliberate move downhill into obscurity. And many of you have already done this at least once. Remember the time you woke up to piss? How the hall was a bit longer and a bit darker. How the bathroom felt deeper, the damp smell, the sound of something keeping very still. The relief when you got back in bed beyond the emptying of a bladder, that was a threshold. And you would have been better off pissing the bed. When you see a pair of stairs in the woods, don't go up. You won't get down the same place, if at all. Accept that nature can hold a grudge. And some places are out for blood. I don't have any tips there. I don't fuck with cornfields 3 hours away from anything that matters. And I don't go into the woods to find some long-forgotten forest god when insane with age. Gods are some reality fucking bullshit in and of themselves. Ask me if you like, but know that curling up and dying is often the better choice. If you feel real enough and the forest is kind to humans, the woods can help. But if you are slipping, stay out of the scary places, like all of Appalachia, Aokigahara, Hoya Baciu. Fourth, don't give up. You are a human, goddammit. You are an observer, and with practice you can fix this shit. Everything out to get you is either afraid or jealous of you. These things invariably manifest as anger, hatred, and obsession. Don't allow the things that go bump in the night to lure you in. Don't allow the drown to drag you down to the depths. Focus on the mundane. Focus on the real. Keep reaching out. Do not give in to the void. It's not calmness and rest. It's nothingness. It's lack of being. And you'll just turn into a hollow shell, all scooped out and ready to be worn by whatever the broken rules allow. Fucked up and ready to mingle. If you can get a pet, your reality, and theirs reinforces one another. Two entities stand out more than one. The awareness required to take good care of your pet will make you a stronger observer. And if you get really good and want to start kicking back, you're already 50% of the way to a familiar. But for now, look around. Ask us how real you still are. I'm warning you, you won't like what you find. You're probably leaves real than you thought. And I'm sorry, knowing is the only way to get better. But it's also the worst way to stay hidden. The ones that have already slipped away will become jealous. Your childhood buddy will contact you soon. Don't meet up. Story 3. My friends and I went urban exploring in an abandoned hospital. We made a disturbing discovery. I stared up at the entrance to the old hospital, drinking in its features. Cracked spiderwebbed along the bricks and vines that claimed most of the exterior. It was an oddity against the encroaching forest, a relic of a time long since past. It felt wrong for it to be there, out of place, which only worked to pique my interest even further. Well, are we going to stand here all day or are we checking this sucker out? Kyle asked, lightly slapping me on the back. Let's go. Don't want to lose too much daylight. Maddie interjected, tugging my arm. As you wish. Ladies first. I replied, extending a hand to the door. Maddie rewarded me with a glare. The interior of the hospital was in even worse state than the outside. Lights had been smashed out, graffiti coated the walls, and pink insulation hung from the ceiling above. As an avid urbex enthusiast, I was reveling in it. Something about being in a place that humans didn't belong always sent a rush of exhilaration surging through my veins. I live for the thrill. But after what happened that day, my passion for urban exploring has been snuffed out. We were taking photos of abandoned medical equipment when Kyle brought it up. Hey guys, He spoke in a whisper, despite the fact that we were alone. Yeah, I replied, sensing the tremor in his voice. Does it feel like we're being followed? I dunno, it might just be me, but something tells me that we're not the only ones here. Stop. You're trying to prank me, and it's not going to work this time. How gullible do you think I am? Maddie retorted, crossing her arms. Maddie, I promise I'm not joking. Her expression faltered when she realized the severity of Kyle's tone. You're really not? Jake, is he being serious? I sighed. When Maddie got freaked out, it wasn't a good time for anyone. Things had been going smoothly up until that point, and I didn't want to ruin a good thing. Tell you what, Kyle, if we check out a couple more rooms and your sixth sense is still going haywire, we can leave. Sound good? Despite their nods of approval, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The tension was thicker, solid, as if I could reach out and touch it. Knowing what I know now, I wish we would have left the moment Kyle said something. We continued our search with no further protest from either party. We photographed our findings in silence, that pervasive unease still omnipresent. I kept trying to find something to say, but I couldn't arrange the words properly in my head. After a while, it was Maddie who broke the silence. So who's down to find Morg? She said as a devilish grin inched across her lips. Kyle and I shot each other a glance. Neither of us wanted to go, but we didn't really have a choice. If we refused, Maddie would call us cowards until the day we died. Sure, let's do it, Kyle said. He tried to sound confident, but he and I both knew the truth. All right, but after that, we're leaving. My friends each nodded, and with that, we set off to find the hospital's morgue. It only took us about 10 minutes. As we walked, I tried to discern if I could feel the eyes watching our every move like Kyle had described. At one point, I thought I did feel it. An intense, overwhelming sensation that we weren't alone. I found myself throwing glances behind us every so often, but I didn't voice my concerns, a decision that I regret to this day. Before I knew it, I found myself descending the stairs to the basement. Our flashlight beams danced along the staircase as we went, shedding light into the inky depths below. Once we reached the bottom, there was a long hallway with a set of double doors at the end. Spooky, isn't it? Maddie whispered as we continued. Yeah, feels ominous, I said as a shiver rippled through me. The air was colder down there, lending to the creepy ambience. We paused once we reached the doors. Okay, who wants to go first? Maddie asked, surveying our expressions. I think you should. You suggested it. Kyle retorted, wearing a shit-eating grin. Yep, as I said before, ladies first. I joined in, earning me another glare. Fine, but if I die, I'm gonna come back just to take you with me. Maddie pushed open the doors and led the charge, Kyle and I following behind her. Standing in that room sent a chill down my spine. Kyle turned to me, that taunting smirk returning to his lips, and he whispered into my ear, let's prank Maddie. You distract her. Meanwhile, I'll climb into one of the freezer racks and make a bunch of noise in there. I bet she'll scream loud enough to wake the dead. I smiled at him. Maddie was never going to forgive us for this. One problem. I muttered, how are you going to close yourself in? I'll figure out. Just dash. Nice try, dickheads. I can hear you. Maddie glowered at us like we were the spawns of Satan. My face flushed with color, and sweat beaded atop my brow. Hey, yeah, we weren't actually going to go through with it. Just an idea, Kyle said, rubbing the back of his neck. She wasn't buying it. Bang. A sudden rattling sound erupted from one of the mortuary chambers that Kyle had centered his plot around. It started off quiet, small enough to be dismissed as nothing more than the groan of old metal, but it soon escalated to a loud clanging. We stared at each other wide-eyed, our faces pale as ghosts. The sound had grown into a deafening pounding. Something was being slammed hard against the inside of the door. It was clear that Kyle's earlier premonition had been spot on. We were not alone in that hospital. We stood, frozen in shock, left to helplessly watch as the door buckled under the weight of the blows. Over and over and over again. Bang, 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 bang. To my utter horror, the door gave way. For a moment it was silent, the dented metal creaking, barely clinging to its hinges. Then, something began crawling out of the unit. Something sinister. A pair of feet emerged from the darkness. The skin was a dark purple, and stitching around the ankles was barely holding together. A dirty, blood-stained hospital gown followed. Then a twin set of patchwork arms. Finally, the thing's head shot out of the dark as it hoisted itself off of the freezer rack. That face will haunt me for the rest of my life. Stitches piece its mottled skin together. Roughly hewn flesh sallow and wrong. Its smile was crooked. Too many teeth fighting for space in that twisted grin. And its eyes, they were completely black, devoid of life, devoid of a soul. Kyle suddenly grabbed my arm. Hard. He ran without a word, Maddie in tow. That gave me the resolve I needed to follow them. The three of us bolted down the hallway, desperate to get away from whatever we had awoken. My heart jackhammered in my chest as I realized that we were being chased. The sound of bare feet slapping against the tile fueled my legs to work harder than they ever had before. Once we reached the stairs, I bounded up them three at a time, bolting for the exit the second I reached the top. The thing had been gaining on us in the basement, but once we reached the main landing, I couldn't hear those wet, awkward clops pursuing us any longer. Even so, I didn't let that stop me. I kept running, never once looking back, until I burst out the front doors, unlocked my car, and threw myself into the driver's seat. Only then did I allow myself to catch my breath. A second later, Kyle threw open the passenger side door, dove in and slammed down the lock. He turned to me, his face pale and soaked in sweat, still trying to catch his breath. He managed to croak out the words that still haunt me to this day. "Jake, where's Maddie?" My heart plummeted into my chest. She wasn't there. Should we go back? I asked, a cold dread blanketing me at the thought. The two of us sat there, staring out the windshield, praying that somehow our friend would explode out of those doors and join us. But that didn't happen. We sat there for longer than I'd like to admit, completely silent, desperately grasping for a solution. Eventually, we called the cops. The police searched the entire hospital and combed the surrounding woods, but they didn't find any trace of Maddie or the man who had chased us. Aside from the texts agreeing to meet that day, there was no evidence that Maddie had even been there in the first place. It was as if she simply poofed out of existence. But Kyle and I knew what really happened. We had abandoned her down there with that monstrosity. We put our own safety over hers. We were the reason that she was missing, and we had to live with that. Kyle and I drifted apart in the weeks that followed. Maddie still hadn't been found, and I think the weight of what we'd been through was too heavy for us to come to terms with. When I look at Kyle, the crushing reminder of what we'd done, or more aptly, what we'd failed to do, would come flooding back. It eventually reached a point where we would only sporadically check in on one another. That is, until he sent me a strange text one afternoon. "Hey man, I need to talk to you." Not over the phone, face to face. "Meet me by the pond in the park at 8 tonight. The message caught me off guard. Whatever it was that Kyle needed to tell me, it sounded urgent. As I would come to find out, I found Kyle sitting on a park bench by the pond. It wasn't completely dark yet, but the sun was dipping below the horizon. As I claimed my spot beside him, I noted that he was staring off into the distance. His hair was disheveled, and it appeared as if he hadn't slept in days. "Kyle, are you okay? You look like you've been through the ringer." He turned to me, his bloodshot eyes connecting with mine. "Jake, I'm not okay. I don't think I'll ever be okay again, man. I can't take it." He was getting choked up, and tears began to well in the corners of his eyes. "No, you can't think like that. Everything's going to be all right. If this is about Maddie, she'll dash." Kyle turned to me, the stone-cold look in his gaze deterred me from finishing my sentence. "You haven't been seeing her, have you? So it's only me. Fuck, F-U-C-K. I'm screwed, man. It's over. She's gonna come for me. Then she'll use me to get you and dash." I grabbed Kyle's shoulders and shook him. He was raving like a lunatic, an asylum patient off his meds. "Snap out of it. What are you rambling about? Seeing Maddie? What does that mean?" Kyle looked at me with a cold stare. His wild hair fluttered in the wind as an ominous breeze swept through. "This is going to sound insane, but Maddie has been visiting me. or what's left of her. Her mouth is stitched shut, her hair is soaked in blood, and now she's wearing one of those hospital gowns. It got her. She's not alive anymore, Jake. That thing from the hospital. It's using her to get me, and once it does, you'll be next. I couldn't formulate a response. I stared at him, mouth agape, turning over his words in my mind. Could what he had just told me even be possible? That's it. That's all I needed to tell you. Well, and I guess I want to say goodbye. I doubt I'll make it much longer. Jake, I'm so scared. Tears openly streamed down his face, and my first instinct was to pull him into a hug. He sobbed while I tried to console him, failing to subdue the tremors that racked his frame. Look, it's going to work out. Trust me, you are not going to die. I'll think of a way out of this. We both knew that my words were hollow, yet it felt better than saying nothing at all. Kyle pulled away and wiped his eyes, that foreign look from when I'd first seen him returning to his face. Jake, I really hope you're right, for both of our sakes. I called Kyle's mom that night and voiced my concerns. Her son was spiraling, and whether it was due to some entity gunning for his soul or some kind of vivid hallucination, I was determined to get him some help, but my efforts were all in vain. Kyle's body was found 2 days later. He'd eaten a slug from a 12 gauge. The neighbors claimed that they heard screaming, hysterical wails, like Kyle was trying to get away from someone or something, and then they reported hearing multiple gunshots, followed by an unnerving silence. No one saw anyone enter or exit the home, leaving all the witnesses perplexed. The news painted him like a man with a rampant mental condition, a loon who let his untreated delusions frighten him into making the worst decision possible. But I know that what Kyle saw was real, because lately I've been seeing her too. She appeared for first time the night that Kyle died, standing below a street lamp across from my window. His description of her had been deadly accurate. Maddie's eyes were stitched shut, and her arms hung limply by her sides. Her hair glistened with something dark, and the hospital gown she wore had yellow stains blotched across the front. But her smile, there was something sinister behind it, something evil pulling the strings. And I'm afraid that I'm going to find out what that thing is firsthand. 3 days have passed since then. I've started seeing Kyle too. The two of them have been moving progressively closer with each passing day. Last night, they were in my room. They just stared at me, smirking, taunting me. Maddie with her unseeing eyes and grin with too many teeth. Kyle with what was left of his reconstructed face. Flesh and bone melded together to form something vaguely human. Now, I realize that they came to deliver a message. My doomsday clock is ticking down, and I only have a few hours left, because when I awoke this morning, splattered across my bedroom wall in a deep crimson, were the words, "Tonight your soul belongs to me." Story 4. The day we thought we would lose our lives. I've had scary moments before. Weird encounters on late-night buses. Shady people hanging around corners. Times when I thought something might go wrong. But nothing has ever compared to what happened the other day with me and my friends. I don't even know if writing this out will really capture how terrifying it felt in the moment. But I'll try. It started out as just another dumb adventure. There's this forest near where we live. It's not the sort of place people go for walks or picnics. It has a reputation. Everyone in the area has heard stories about it. People say dodgy things go on there, that gangs from the nearby estate sometimes use it as a spot for deals, that weird noises come out at night. If you grew up here, you just kind of know. The forest isn't somewhere you wander without a reason. Of course, that made it more tempting. Me and my group of mates have been hanging out near the football pitch, bored out of our minds, when someone suggested we check it out. At first it was a joke, but then we all started hyping each other up. What's the worst that could happen? We go in, prove to ourselves there was nothing scary about it, and laugh about being idiots for ever believing the rumors. So we set off. The air was heavy that day, muggy in a way that makes your clothes stick to your skin. As we got closer to the forest, I noticed how quickly the atmosphere shifted. The estate behind us was loud, kids shouting, cars rumbling past, the constant hum of life. But the closer we got to the tree line, the quieter it became. Almost too quiet, like the forest swallowed sound. We hadn't even stepped inside properly when it happened. A sharp crack rang out through the trees. We froze. For a split second we thought it was just a branch snapping, but then it came again, another loud crack, this time sharper, unmistakable. It sounded like a gunshot. I looked at my friends. Their faces mirrored mine. Wide eyes, pale, unsure whether to laugh it off or bolt. Nobody laughed. Another bang echoed through the air, and that was enough. Without even saying anything, we all turned and sprinted back the way we'd come. The adrenaline hit instantly. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt, and all I could think was, what if someone's shooting? What if we're in the line of fire? We didn't stop until we were completely clear of the trees. Only when we collapsed on the grass, gasping for air, did we look at each other and start trying to explain it away. Had to be fireworks, one mate said, though he didn't sound convinced. Could have been someone chopping wood. Another offered weakly, but we all knew what we'd heard. For a while we sat there, half joking, half shaken, convincing ourselves we'd been stupid. The human brain is great at downplaying fear once you're safe. Eventually, someone suggested we go back, that maybe we just worked ourselves up for nothing. I can't explain why we agreed. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was boredom, but against all common sense, we decided to head back toward the forest. Looking back now, that was the moment everything started spiraling. The second approach felt different from the start. None of us were laughing this time. The trees loomed taller, the shadows darker, every sound in the distance sharper. Even the air seemed heavier, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. That's when we noticed the car. It was white, sitting there like it had just appeared. At first we thought it was parked by coincidence, but then we realized it was moving slowly, almost deliberately. The windows were tinted black, impossible to see through, and something about it set off alarms in my head. We tried to play it cool, kept walking like nothing was wrong, but then we heard it. The distinct sound of a car door opening and slamming shut. We all turned our heads just slightly, not enough to make it obvious, but enough to catch the movement. A tall figure stepped out for a moment before getting back in. A few seconds later it happened again, door opening, door closing, like they were checking something. That's when it clicked. The car wasn't just passing through, it was watching us. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but none of us wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Then one of my friends muttered under his breath, "Boys, it's following us." He was right. Every time we moved, the car seemed to adjust its position, keeping just enough distance to not be obvious, but close enough that we couldn't mistake it anymore. The tinted windows made it worse. We could only see vague outlines of people inside, but there were definitely more than one. We hadn't even made it into the forest yet. We were still on the edge, the shadows stretching long across the ground, when the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone in that car was interested in us, and not in a good way. That's when the real fear set in. We froze for a moment, just staring at the white car. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows over the edge of the forest, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see inside. All we could make out were dark outlines, shapes shifting slightly, like predators sizing us up. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I'd never felt fear like this before, not that gut level. Something is going to happen, and there's nothing we can do kind of fear. Then it moved again, slowly, deliberately, following the line of the trees as we backed up. The car door opened and closed once more, a sharp metallic clang in the silence. And that's when we noticed him. A man stepped out. He was tall, ridiculously tall, muscular, broad-shouldered, built like someone who could lift a car if he wanted to. But the thing that made my stomach twist was how completely covered he was. All black clothing, gloves, hood, face fully concealed, nothing but darkness. And in each hand, weapons. Two long, jagged blades that looked like zombie knives, the kind you see in horror movies or survival games. I swear, even from where we were, he moved with intent, and every step he took screamed danger. We froze. The outlines in the car hadn't moved yet, but we knew there were others inside, just waiting, silent and menacing. I don't know how many there were, 3, 4, 5? I could only make out shapes behind the tinted glass, enough to know we weren't alone. Panic hit, like a tidal wave. One of my friends, Jay, the one with torn ligaments in his leg, tried to step back too quickly and tripped over a root. He hit the ground hard, letting out a sharp cry. We were all frozen for a second, torn between helping him and running for our lives. I'll never forget that moment. Fear clawed at my throat, but instinct kicked in. We couldn't leave him. Not like this. We grabbed him, half dragging, half supporting him as we moved. Every step was agony for him. Every second felt like we were walking into the jaws of danger. Behind us, the car doors opened and closed again. I could hear the thud of boots hitting the ground. They were moving. I don't know how to explain what it felt like. Pure adrenaline, pure terror. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen with fear. The man in black took deliberate steps toward us, zombie knives catching the fading light, glinting in a way that made my vision narrow with panic. Every second, I could feel the weight of the others in the car, watching us, waiting. We tried to keep moving, Jay hobbling as best he could with our help. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of movement behind us. My friend's breathing was ragged, loud, panicked. One of them turned pale and pressed a hand to his mouth. He was on the verge of throwing up. The fear was that real. Then the man made a step forward, raising his knives slightly, as if testing the air. That was the moment I truly thought we weren't getting out. This is it. This is how it ends. We didn't stop thinking after that. We couldn't. Every move was survival. Our only thought was get out, get out, get out. We staggered toward the edge of the forest, backing away from the trees, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and that man. The white car stayed nearby, shadowing us, its tinted windows hiding everything but the outlines of movement. Every glance we dared to throw revealed more shapes inside. People watching, waiting. The gang presence in the estate suddenly made sense. This wasn't random. They knew the area. They controlled the space, and we were tiny, exposed, completely visible to them. It took everything we had to move Jay along. At one point, he stumbled again, and I thought we were going to lose him entirely. My arms burned from carrying half of his weight. My legs ached, my lungs burned, and my heart felt like it might explode. But the fear, pure, unrelenting fear, pushed us forward. At some point, when my friends finally whispered, "We need to get somewhere, anywhere people are," we managed to spot a shop just at the edge of the estate, light spilling out onto the street, windows bright, workers moving behind the counter. It was like a beacon of safety in a nightmare. But getting there wasn't simple. The man in black had moved closer, the car inching forward, doors opening and closing again. The sounds echoed in my ears, each one a hammer striking my skull. We bolted, Jay stumbling, nearly falling again, us supporting him, barely making it across the empty streets. One of my friends gagged, nearly throwing up in the panic and the smell of sweat, fear, and adrenaline. I thought we wouldn't make it. Thought we'd never reach the shop alive. Finally, we crashed through the doors. The workers looked up in shock, their faces registering immediate concern. We were panting, shaking, unable to even speak at first. One of the men behind the counter moved quickly, asking if we were okay, guiding us to sit down, checking Jay's leg. The relief was instantaneous, a release so heavy it made me shiver uncontrollably. Behind the tinted glass of the shop's windows, I could still see the white car in the distance. It didn't linger for long. Whether they were waiting, deciding, or just watching, I don't know. But the sheer thought of being that close to those people, the man in black, the knives, the others in the vehicle, will haunt me forever. We stayed in that shop for a long time, trying to calm down, trying to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a raw, shaking exhaustion in its place. We debated calling the police, trying to explain what we'd seen. But the thought of them still out there, the car still moving, the man in black still somewhere in the estate, we couldn't. Not yet. Not while we were so exposed. Eventually, After what felt like hours, we left, but we didn't linger. Every shadow seemed like it could be him. Every sound a threat. We got to a safe distance before finally collapsing on a curb, trying to catch our breath and reassure ourselves that we had survived. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. The white car, the tinted windows, the doors opening and closing, the man in black with 2 zombie knives. And the people in the car, they weren't just some randoms. They were organized, aware, and they knew the forest, the streets, the estate. We were just kids in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Jay, poor Jay, torn ligaments, barely able to walk, helped along by friends who were just as scared as him. That moment of tripping, of seeing him fall, of fearing we might not get out, it's burned into my memory. The forest wasn't where we actually got caught. We never even made it in. But the fear we felt, the realization of what could have happened, was real. Every car door slam, every outline in the black tinted windows, every shadow, it felt like death closing in. By the time we reached the shop, finally safe, it was like emerging from a nightmare. But the image of that man, that car, and those knives will stay with me forever. We stayed in that shop for what felt like an eternity. My chest was heaving, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. Adrenaline was still coursing through me, keeping me wired and panicked, even though we were technically safe. Jay was sitting on a stool, leaning heavily on one of my friends, grimacing as he tried not to cry out in pain. His torn ligaments were making every small movement agony, and it added another layer of stress on top of the fear that was still gripping all of us. The workers behind the counter were calm, professional, trying to assess the situation without freaking us out more. They asked us to take deep breaths, water, anything we needed. I think we just sat there for a long time, staring, trying to convince ourselves we were actually okay. But we weren't okay. Not yet, because we all knew we had been so close. The white car, the man in black, the multiple people inside, with outlines moving silently. We were kids. They were adults, organized, armed, and clearly not messing around. One wrong move, one stumble, and it could have ended horribly. Even while catching our breath, I could see the fear reflected in my friend's eyes. One of them was pale and sweaty, staring out the shop window, as though expecting the car to come back any second. He leaned over the counter and almost threw up right there. The mix of panic, adrenaline, and nausea was overwhelming. It was the first time any of us had ever felt that kind of terror. Not scared, terrified. Every inch of our bodies was screaming to get away, yet we had nowhere further to run at that moment. We debated calling the police, trying to explain everything we'd seen, but the thought of that man, the knives, the others in the car, it froze us. We weren't ready to deal with the implications of bringing law enforcement into it. We were just grateful to be alive. We knew the moment we stepped outside, we were still vulnerable. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time didn't feel real. Eventually, we mustered the courage to leave the shop. We moved cautiously, sticking close to each other, keeping to the open streets as much as possible. Every shadow, every parked car, every rustling sound in the estate's alleyways made us jump. It was like our minds were rewiring themselves to fear everything in that area. Jay was the slowest. Every step he took reminded us how close we had come to disaster. But we supported him, rotating who helped him along. Even though we were terrified, we couldn't leave a friend behind. And the fear, the real, bone-deep fear, kept us moving. Not for fun, not for adventure, but for survival. As we finally distanced ourselves from this state, I could feel my entire body starting to shake. Adrenaline, fear, exhaustion, and relief all rolled together in a way I've never felt before. Every time I blinked, I half expected to see that white car at the end of the street, waiting, but it didn't appear. We made it back to the football pitch, the open area where we had started our afternoon adventure. Open space helped. We weren't trapped between buildings or trees anymore, but the pitch didn't feel safe either. The fear had left a residue on us that no amount of sunlight or open space could wash away. Sitting there, panting, we slowly tried to piece together what had happened. We had been inches away from disaster. The forest hadn't claimed us, but the estate, that white car, the man in black, the people inside, could have, we had stumbled into a situation far beyond our understanding or control. And the man in black, I can't stop thinking about him. Tall, muscular, completely covered, knives in each hand. He wasn't just some random thug. He had presence, power, authority, and the fact that he had a group in the car with him, all of them watching, waiting, it made us feel like we were playing some terrible game. Even now, weeks later, I remember every detail. The white car, the way the tinted windows hid everything but the outlines, the sound of the doors opening and closing, the man stepping out, raising the knives, approaching deliberately, the branches snapping, the feeling of being hunted, knowing we were trapped. I also remember Jay tripping, falling, and us half dragging him to safety. That moment could have ended everything. The panic in our faces, the adrenaline, the nausea from fear. It was a perfect storm of terror. One wrong move, and the story could have ended completely differently. The shop workers were angels. I don't know what we would have done without them. Sitting there, finally safe, catching our breath. It felt like a miracle. But the images stayed with us. The outlines in the car, the knives, the man in black, the sounds, the chase. Since then, I've replayed it over and over in my mind. I've imagined what could have happened if we had stepped fully into the forest, if Jay had fallen completely, if the car had moved faster, if the man had advanced more aggressively. It's terrifying to think how close we came to a real-life nightmare. I don't think I'll ever forget the fear. The kind that grips you from the inside out. That's the thing. Even when you're safe, even when you're on solid ground, the memory of that fear lingers. The white car, the man in black, the outlines of others inside, the snapping branches, the sound of the doors slamming again and again. We made it out alive, yes, but the forest, the estate, that man, it will always haunt me. And I'll never, ever go near that area again. Not because of the forest itself, not even because of rumors, but because of the people, the fear they inspired, the reality that we could have been so easily caught. Even now, I feel a chill writing this, knowing what could have happened. Knowing the odds we survived, it's surreal, but it happened. And if there's one thing I want anyone reading this to understand, it's that sometimes the scariest moments aren't in horror movies or games. Sometimes it's just reality. And that day, reality was terrifying. I don't know who those people were. I don't know what they wanted or why we were in their sights. But I know this, we were lucky, extremely lucky, and I'll carry that memory and that fear with me for the rest of my life. Story 5. Bright girl, still, my kind of experience. I was drowning, like literally eating rice with ketchup level broke. 2 jobs, 3 gig apps. Still choosing between Chloe's inhaler and the electric bill. She used to fall asleep on the couch with my phone still clutched in her hand. The white noise app playing ocean waves, I couldn't afford to take her to. I used to stare at her and just ache, because she was so good, so bright, so mine. And I couldn't give her anything but exhaustion and sorries. The ad popped up on my Insta feed, At first, I laughed. Sounded like a scam. But the girl in the ad looked like Chloe. Same gap tooth grin. Same weird little sparkle. And the mom? She looked safe. Rested. I clicked. Finally, we had leverage. Kinda helped me realize that Chloe's joy, her laugh, her curious little brain were assets. Other kids had college savings and private tutors. Chloe had her charm. I just needed to monetize it. The first time she went viral from a clip of her making animal sounds out of veggie snacks. We got free groceries for a month. Her second reel paid her ER copay. After that, it just kept rolling. Branded playdates, unboxing vids, authentic emotional reactions. I told myself it was harmless. Fun, even. Better than dropping her off at that sketchy after-school program where half the kids' parents are anti-vaxxers. Then the kind of bio band arrived. It looked like one of those sleek Apple bracelets, but it tracked engagement, authenticity, and emotional resonance. Basically, if her joy was real, sponsors paid more. If it wasn't, the algorithm nudged me with gentle parenting prompts. Play this sound. Offer this treat. Adjust the lighting. Not gonna lie, at first, it weirded me out. Watching her brainwave graph spike while she giggled felt invasive. But when the platform messaged me, Chloe is showing optimal trust state patterns. You're doing great, mama. I sobbed. No one had ever said that to me before. They call it the parent stream. Real-time coaching. Personalized tips. AI co-parenting. And I know how that sounds. But it worked. Chloe ate better, slept better, and learned faster. She smiled more starred that asterisk, all I wanted. All any of us want, right? Her spark started to dim a little when she turned 12. I noticed she went quiet during streams, eyes unfocused. Sponsors flagged it as emotional ambiguity. I told myself she was just maturing. Kind agreed, early adolescence often presents as metric friction. Stay consistent. Trust the system. When Chloe turned 13, she started calling the bio band a leash. Complained the videos were fake. Griping about being watched inside her own head. Which, okay, yeah, the band does monitor micro-expressions and hormone output. But it's passive. It's not like I controlled her. I just curated. She started cussing on live streams. Locked herself in the bathroom during sponsored content. Screamed things like, "You're so SUS mom," to 200,000 viewers. We lost 3 major brands in 2 weeks. I spiraled, not because of the monetization. Emotionally, I was losing her. After everything we built, after everything we sacrificed, that's when kind support reached out, not with a punishment, with a gift. They said Chloe showed signs of developmental turbulence, but platinum tier creators qualified for early recalibration at Azure Horizons, a kind-affiliated wellness campus. The staff showed me the quiet, the rebellion, the breakdowns. Not her fault. She was overloaded. On a line. They could help. Children aren't broken. They said they're just under-optimized. So I let them take her. Not forever. Just until she stabilized. They flew us both out to Canyon in the Caribbean. Kids stay in the dorms. Parents get villas. Spa credits. Meal plan. Even a personal content advisor. I made a TikTok about it called Strong Moms Choose Structure. It hit 1.2 million views in 24 hours. And when I saw her again, she glowed. White uniform, clear skin, calm posture, eyes bright. She smiled like she meant it. Kinder said her metrics had never been stronger. Emotional compliance, gratitude retention, joy loop sustainment. All way up, she called me her primary benefactor. It teaches her a way to honor the people who invested in their potential. It felt respectful, a little creepy, maybe, but mostly respectful. Sometimes I miss her Real laugh, the loud, snorty one that bursts out of her like a firework. I hear an echo of it sometimes, under the optimized cadence. But then I remember how sick she used to get, how scared I used to be. This version, she's safe, she's successful, she's stable. Last night, I got a kind alert on the Villa Mirror. New feature unlocked, Legacy Lattice. It read, Platinum Plus confirmed. Initiate neural template preservation. Ensure account holder Chloe's optimized essence remains your perpetual asset. Requires on-site procedure. Consent unlocks diamond tier benefits. I stroked the photo of her hooked up to the delicate silver nodes behind her ears. Peaceful, beautiful. Preserve her. Keep her this way, forever. The perfect Chloe. The grateful Chloe. The version I fought so hard to reach. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hand was shaking. Not with fear. With awe. After everything. What mother wouldn't want the very best for her child's future? Story 6. I made a deal to feed whatever's in the swamp every month. I shouldn't be writing this down. He said if I told anyone I'd pay for it. It's been 3 months since I've made this deal, and I have to hold my end of the bargain up tonight. I'm going to write down everything I've experienced and post it as time goes on. Hopefully, he doesn't find out about this. If you ever walk through a Louisiana swamp at night, you know the air doesn't just sit heavy. it smothers you. The smell of rot and swamp grabs onto your clothes. Frogs, crickets, and cicadas alike croak and chirp until all at once it all stops. The silence is worse than anything because he carries it with him. I felt the first time I came here, carrying the sack of fish he asked for. With each step my boot sank deeper, requiring more effort to pull out each time, and I swear the swamp created ripples on its own as it was holding its breath. The water darkened, and the algae got fuller and thicker as I approached the swamp center. The murky water swayed as the swamp took a breath of life. He rose from a wave of water black as tar, his form bending the surface as if the swamp itself obeyed him. His at least 10-foot frame towered over me, tall and imposing like a wall. Moonlight caught the rivulets of water cascading down his face, casting the swamp in a sickening blue hue. "We're Wyatt, boy." The voice rolled out low and wet with a deep growl, like the swamp itself had learned to speak. "All right, boy. I see you brought me something proper." He smiled, or at least I think he did. His whiskers twitched and wiggled the ends. Water kept streaming down them like inky black strands of oil. "Don't be shy now. A little lagniappe for me. A little fortune for you. That's how this works. 1 meal a month, share. Just one. You give, I give." There was something about his low, syrup-thick voice that dragged you in while somehow managing to keep you in place. His mouth curled wider, showing teeth too flat and too many. "Remember why you're here, boy. Don't play dumb and shy with me." The words stuck under my skin like leeches. Because he was right. I did remember. I remembered her walking out of my apartment with her bags, chasing someone with more money. I remembered the way I swore in anger that I'd do anything to never feel that small and insignificant again. And I remembered how the swamp called me that night, like it knew my anger better than I did. I swallowed the lump in my throat and shakily stepped forward. Each step I took churned the mud and water into a slush that I needed to pry myself out of. I hoisted the bag of fish over my shoulder. The air around it smelt like my dad's trawler, only left in the sun for far too long. When the bag hit the ground, he let out a wet, rattling like snicker that vibrated in his throat. He lifted the bag and let out a single laugh, like a sharp crack in the air, and then swallowed it whole. His throat bulged as the fish slid down his grotesque slimy form. For a moment, the swamp itself seemed to shudder along with him. Then he let out a low, satisfied growl, licking the corners of his mouth. His breath was hot and sticky, smelled of death. "That's real good, boy. You keep bringing me meals, and I'll be bringing you fortune. Gold in your pockets, luck on your back. You won't never feel that small again." His voice dripped sweet honey as he chuckled, but his eyes pinned me in place like a piece of rebar stuck through my foot. He leaned in closer, whiskers twitching as he exhaled. He was so close I could make out bumps along his long, flowing whiskers. But fish didn't last long, did it now? "Next time bring me some white meat, raw, tender, and clean. You hear that, boy? Don't come back with nothing less." My hands couldn't stop shaking. My chest felt tight, like the swampy air itself was crawling into my lungs and stealing my breath. Part of me wanted to run, but another part, an uglier part, lit up at his words. Riches, power, never being the one left behind again. The thought made me sick and thrilled at once. I shifted my weight as I grabbed my left arm with my right. I nodded and let out a low whimper. "Why, yes, sir," I said, voice still trembling and wavering. He nodded before falling into the water and disappearing into the murky wetlands. I turned away from the swamp and slowly started trudging back. Eventually the swamp flooded back to life as I made my way further from him. The air felt thinner now, less suffocating, but the weight on my chest didn't leave. Each step I took, I wet squelch followed, reminding me of where I was. I was going home, farther from him, but also deeper into what I promised. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was completely set, and only the glow of street lights remained. I didn't bother washing the mud from my boots, just took them off on a mat by the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling, staring at the floor. Even here in my own apartment, the air smelled faintly of rotten fish and swamp water, clinging to my skin and clothes. I wanted to tell myself it had all been a nightmare, but the thrill in my chest, dark and hungry, told a different story. He had promised power, fortune, a way to never be forgotten. And part of me, the part still simmering with anger and resentment since she left, wanted to believe him. Fear returned with a sharper edge. The swamp hadn't just consumed the fish. It had taken something from me too. I could feel it lingering, a weight pressing at my mind, like teeth grazing the edges of my thoughts. I wanted to run, to tell someone, to undo what I'd agreed to, but my lips stayed sealed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, towering, black as tar, moving through the water with an impossible, unnatural grace. And beneath it all, gnawing at my gut, I felt the truth of my bargain. Riches and power weren't free. They never were. And the next month, I knew, in a way I didn't want to admit, that it would demand far more than fish. Story 7. I found an extra light switch in my apartment, and it ruined my life. It's been about 7 months since I signed my year-long lease for this shithole apartment. I don't think I'll be making it another 5 months. I'm not sure if I'll even make it another night. My cheapness might have cost me my life. I was going to make this a short cry for help before I remembered that no one would ever believe me, and it would be too late anyway. Hell, I wouldn't believe this if I stumbled across it. I'll just take my time here and pour my heart out. 7 months ago, I made what I now realize was the worst decision of my life. I moved into this dumpy-ass apartment building after finally making a move out of my hometown. I had romanticized the idea of escapism so much. I'd picture myself in New York City or something like that, walking down the sidewalk with some overpriced coffee in my hands and my tasteful messenger bag slung around my shoulder. I'd be walking to somewhere idyllic, maybe get together with new friends that took an interest in me or something like that. I never made it too far into that daydream. I just wanted to get out of that little rural town. It was one of those towns that was just a road with a bunch of sad old signs along it, blown out buildings with occasional passing silhouettes that were once somebody's. Let's just say I couldn't afford New York City, but I could afford a small city a few hours from that rotting place of town. It's a city with some high rises and skyscrapers, but nothing that's going to put it on somebody's road trip. It's a pretty lonely place, honestly. It's old and tired like my hometown, but in a more industrial way. Walkability isn't much of a reality here unless you want to take your chances with the harsh weather or the rampant mugging. So there went my sidewalk daydream. Still, I wanted to make the most of the experience. I got an apartment right downtown for a reasonable price, and figured life would improve from there on. However, I failed to truly grasp how much of a piece of shit the apartment was until I moved in. I was a little too naive at the time to understand the spectrum of stress caused by a landlord special. The door knobs would come right off. The fridge never fully shut. The toilet wouldn't flush without some sacred jiggling sequence, and a whole mess of other inconveniences or hazards. This apartment also has a lot of strange features. The floor plan doesn't make much sense, and anyone with a shred of interior design knowledge, or even just self-respect, would have immediately crossed this place off their list. I was so desperate, though, that I didn't mind when I entered the apartment and just saw a hallway full of closed doors. I shrugged off how strange it was that each room was contained behind one of those doors, with none of the rooms connecting to one another. The kitchen is its own close-off room, the living room too. The only way to get anywhere in the apartment was to take the central hallway. It honestly looks like one of those hallway chase shots in Scooby-Doo or some shit. For how awful the place is, it's not small. There are a good amount of rooms, and I actually haven't been able to fill one particular room until recently. When you walk into the place, there's a long hallway and then 9 doors total. There's 4 on the left side, 4 on the right, and 1 at the very end of the hallway. On the right side, the doors in order are the living room, a closet, then my bedroom, and then the bathroom. On the left side, it starts with the kitchen, then another closet, the dining room, and a second bedroom. The 9th door in the middle is that extra room. I barely had enough stuff just to fill the other rooms, and I lacked any sort of motivation to do anything with the extra room for a while. I have a corner unit, so all the rooms on the right side of the apartment have windows as well as the extra room. The extra room has these neat casement windows that I like to look out of but offer little privacy. I had thought to make the extra room a sort of reading area or a home theater type deal, but I was flat broke. The extra room is strange. It's really big and open. It feels like an apartment of its own. One night, I was in there just looking out at the other surrounding high rises when I noticed a light switch that had been painted over right next to the window. I didn't think much of it. It was clearly just another amenity of my shithole apartment. I left it alone. As time went on, I found myself in that extra room most nights just looking out the window. I didn't have the money for any fancy streaming services, nor friends to leech off of, so I just looked out that window most nights. It was peaceful, and at night the city looked bigger and more lively. I loved seeing all the different lights, the blurry shapes of people in their own world watching their TV or making dinner. It didn't take long for me to start picking at the paint on that hidden light switch as I watched the world wind down every night. I'd chip away at the paint little by little with my finger while I was lost in my thoughts. It took a few days to make any sort of progress, but eventually I had peeled off enough paint to see the light switch. It was a different color than the new plain white paint that covered everything else. It was bronze, and the switch itself was almost antique looking. It got me wondering how old this building was. A few nights later, the old switch was finally uncovered. It caught the light in an intoxicating way, and I flipped the switch on and off a few times to see if it still worked and what it controlled. Nothing changed. The next night brought a heavy snowstorm. It was beautiful, and you already know I was set up at that window staring out at the world as the brilliant snow fell. At some point, I was reminded of the bronze light switch, and I flicked it, not remembering if I'd already tried it the night before. Nothing changed. I absentmindedly flicked it again, and noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A light turned on in the building across the street. It was the rightmost room on the top floor of the neighboring high rise, which was quite a bit taller than my building. At first, I just thought it was something new to look at, my hand still on the switch. I craned my neck up and leaned in to watch the new light. I lost concentration and flicked the switch down, and the room's light turned off. That caught my attention. I looked down at the switch and back up at the now dark pane of glass. I flipped the switch up, and at that exact moment the room's light turned back on. I continued doing this for probably 5 minutes, just flipping the switch on and off and watching as the faraway room's light perfectly matched. The snow began falling even more, but I could still make out the light turning off and on with every flick of the old switch. I was baffled before too long, so baffled that I went right to sleep, convinced I was deprived of logic and reasoning. The next night came, and at first, I was definitely reluctant to mess with that switch or to even go in that room. I tried staring out other windows, but they were cloudy with trapped moisture. I remember thinking I should get a cat or something before I finally caved and walked into the extra room. There was traffic on the street below from some accident that night, and it provided me with enough entertainment to remain distracted from what happened the night before. The standstill row of gray cars could only stimulate me for so long before I was looking at that switch again. I flipped it. Such a harmless action, and so quick too. Flipping a light switch. Usually done by second nature. What's the harm in it? Why did flipping that switch feel so important? The same room from the night before lit up. It was a yellow, more vintage-looking tone of light. I tried using some beaten-up binoculars from my childhood, but all I got was a somehow fuzzier view of the room. From my vantage, I could only really see the ceiling of that mysterious place. That's got to be an apartment, right? It looks too big to be a storage closet, too small to be anything commercial. I flipped the switch again, and the light turned off in perfect succession. Is somebody fucking with me? Flip, the light came back on. How would they even orchestrate that? I sat there for a long time, repeatedly flipping the switch on and off as if the repetition of this would bring more clarity. I stood there flipping that switch on and off like I was a geriatric old man smacking a television set, hoping for a signal. The traffic jam cleared out, and the streets became empty. I sat there, still as I could be, periodically flipping the switch on and off. The light synced every single time. Clearly this light switch, for some reason, was wired to that room in the building across the street. As to why, I had no earthly idea. One expensive project, and for what? What purpose does it serve? I flipped the switch up, and the light came back on. That last flip of the switch activated a sorry light bulb moment within me. What if I found a way into that room? So I waited in the bitter cold, rehearsing my moves. I had counted up from the ground and determined the room which connected to my light switch was on the 31st floor. And again, it was a corner unit on the right side of the building when viewing from my apartment. I waited for someone to go in or out of the building. Finally, I saw a woman with a giant coat drag her scrappy little dog towards the door. I was hesitant to actually go inside, but then I gathered some courage, walked right up to that door, and casually slid through as she opened it. I had planned some elaborate cover story that my friend wouldn't answer his phone and all that, but when it came time, I just acted natural and thanked her as I entered. The halls were green and sickly looking, much like my apartment building. The elevator was questionable at best and creaked a little too much as I stepped into it. There were 33 floors, so I was glad I had made note of correct one. I slowly reached up and hit the circular button for the 31st floor, and it flickered on, glowing with a jaundiced yellow. My hands grew clammy as the elevator ascended at a tortuously slow pace. I watched the numbers rise. 11, 12, 15. This is a stupid idea. Man, this is all in my head. Why am I doing this? 26, 27, 28. Is this even legal? What am I going to do exactly? The elevator finally dinged and bounced to stop on the 31st floor before I had an actual plan. The doors were reluctant to open, and for a moment, my heart sank thinking I had been trapped in there. Those silver doors creaked and warped as they moved out of the way and exposed me to another green hallway. I stepped out and turned left. I could see all the way down the long, dilapidated hall, the green lights humming and buzzing. My alleged culprit was a final door on the right. It was room 3118. I sat outside the door like a maniac, just looking at it. I wondered what to do. I could barely see through the slits on the sides of the door. All I could make out was that the lights were on in there. Do I knock? I looked around me and made sure the coast was clear. What the hell do I say? Maybe I'm lost? Maybe it's an honest mistake? If anyone lives in there, I'm sure they're very confused about their lights turning on and off. But why wouldn't they take control of their own lights? Maybe they can't use them. But that doesn't make any sense. Why would I be able to control their lights? But they see I knocked on the door and startled myself. It felt almost automatic. Unsure what to do, I started to shuffle away and make my retreat. Then I decided to stay and wait. I waited for a few seconds. The pause was long and uncomfortable enough for my hand to instinctually rise for another round of knocking. A faint and vague sound, dampened enough to even be in my own mind. But it was a sound of dragging or a thud of some kind with something rolling afterward. What was that? The sound might have continued, or my mind might have kept wandering. Maybe the neighbors? The walls were thin in this place. I could begin to hear indiscernible conversation somewhere down the hall. I could hear the hissing chatter of a TV show somewhere else. Underneath all that, though, in room 3118, a rolling sound still. Maybe, what is that noise? I left not long after. I was getting freaked out, and I'm sure I would have freaked out anyone living there. When I got back to my place across the street, I felt very paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. I opened the squeaky door to my apartment, and the long dark hallway of 9 closed doors now made me nauseous with dread. I wanted to leave that apartment behind and run back into my mom's arms or something. I felt like a child. I walked in, though, and I wish I hadn't. I took a scorching hot shower. It made me feel a little better, but I was still so paranoid. I kept hearing, or thought I was hearing, similar thudding and rolling sounds in one of the other rooms. Old pipes, that's all. It took some more courage to leave the bathroom and enter the cold dark hall. I didn't know what door to go through next, the kitchen door, bedroom door, or the extra door. My stomach was in a knot, but I thought I should probably try and eat something. It was around midnight by that point, and I felt hopeless knowing there were so many more hours of dark left. I looked down at my half-eaten peanut butter sandwich and knew this knot in my stomach wouldn't go away if I didn't have some kind of closure. I wanted to go into the extra room and turn off that switch for the night. I braved the silent hallway again and opened up the 9th door, into that grand room that turned the faintest sound into a booming echo. I walked up to the big window I always looked out of and, with great caution, looked up at room 3118. The light was still on, and there was something up there now. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a big shadow. It wasn't a person, but something boxy looking. Something square or just rigid, really. Furniture? Did someone move something around in there? I didn't know what I was looking at, and I honestly didn't have the mental space to think about it much longer. I flipped off the light. I flipped it back on. I couldn't deny my interest. I was very invested in this whole ordeal now. The rigid thing started moving. At least I thought it looked like it was slowly changing position. It moved very smoothly and very, very slow. It looked like it was rolling or sliding. It rolled from the right side of the window to the left. I flipped a switch here and there to see if it made any sort of difference. It didn't seem to. I watched it roll along for a few minutes from right to left until I jumped at the sight of the neighboring window's light turning on. It was whoever lived in room 3116. I saw a person moving around in there, and it looked like a more elderly man. He looked like he was listening closely to something, as if there were an intruder in his house. I didn't know what to do, but now I felt intrusive watching this man fumble around. I decided to switch the light off in 3118 and try to forget about the whole thing. I wanted to remove myself from this weird nightmare entirely. I decided that the next day I'd try to disconnect the switch and install some curtains. Find a new hobby. That all sounded like something rooted in everyday monotony, and I let the comfort of curtain shopping lull me to sleep. In my sleep that night, I heard the sound of aggressive wind chimes far away. They weren't very melodic wind chimes, so just one tone that reverberated. Then I heard an awful banging sound. It was loud and most definitely not a dream. It sounded distant, but it contained a lot of power. It was 3:48 a.m. I tossed and I turned some until my bedroom started flashing red. I got out of bed and tried to see what was happening outside from my bedroom window, but I couldn't see through all the gloom trapped in between the glass. I had no choice but to go into the extra room if I wanted to see outside. There was a large fire truck that was blocking off one side of the road, and police were putting up caution tape on the other. Squad cars were rolling in one after the other. A few ambulances were present too, but it seemed like no one was in a big rush. They were all circled around, their hands waving about in a casual, conversational way. At some point, one of them looked up and pointed, and the others followed along. I followed the trajectory of the gestures all the way to the 31st floor. Room 3116 was now missing its pane of glass. The curtains whipped out into the open world. The lights were still on, and I could make out vague details of the interior. Back on the ground, a few paramedics moved out of the way long enough for me to see what I was already preparing to see. The old man from room 3116 was laying there in a confusing mess of fabric, flesh, and bone surrounded by a growing puddle of blood. I was shocked. What the hell was going on? What did I do? Am I losing my mind? Did I inadvertently kill that man? The next few days were a blur. My head was heavy with the endless hum of 1,000 different thoughts, all saying similar things. I felt an immense weight of guilt, even though there was nothing tangible that connected me to the old man's plunge. In my head, there was an ever-growing web of continuity. I uncovered the old switch. I flipped it incessantly, and in doing that, I created or resumed something looked like a giant fucking rectangle that rolled around and made a man jump to his death. Or maybe it pushed him out by force. But why? None of this makes any sense. Maybe it's all just make-believe. I could have misunderstood what I saw, the rolling rectangle thing. Maybe it was just an illusion. That old man, maybe it's just a coincidence he chose tonight to leap. I know what I saw. I no longer was going into the extra room for any reason. The thought of that big empty space with that damn switch made me nauseous. I couldn't stand sleeping just a few doors away from it. I wanted to move out and get away. I should have done that. Reality doesn't make room for fiction, though. I couldn't and still can't afford to break my lease. Not by a long shot. That's 3 rent payments and a bundle of paperwork in this godforsaken building. The apartment's obviously outdated, so I thought about making a case for lead paint or something toxic, that could maybe get me out of here for free and quick, but I'm not sure how that'd blow over. I don't even know how to go about doing something like that. I chose the route of avoidance. If I could ignore the extra room, the mystery switch, the dead man's browning blood stain on the road, and the rolling rectangle monster whose whereabouts weren't known, maybe it'd all just fade away with time. A few weeks went by, and that strategy was seeming to work. Even in that short time, I was afforded some hindsight of the whole event, how I was jumping to conclusions, being paranoid, and maybe not appreciating my deteriorating vision that was probably making some serious guesswork. Still, there was no explaining away the light switch. That switch is undoubtedly connected to room 3118, across the street for some unknown reason. I must have tested it hundreds of times. I tried to not let that fact dig too deep when I couldn't sleep or when I think I heard the rolling sounds across the apartment late at night. Eventually, I had saved up enough money to treat myself with some more furniture. I wanted to reclaim the extra room and make it mine. I started with a thrifted recliner and some shelves. I was planning on making it a home theater. After all, I had plans to bury the big casement windows behind blackout curtains. Earlier tonight, I was moving some new finds into the home theater. The room's echo was just as booming and awful as when it was empty, and I flinched with every screech and scrape the furniture would make when I moved it. As I heaved the new TV stand around, my eyes subconsciously checked on room 3118, a reflex that must have been built into me after all those cold nights. The lights were off as I had left them the last time I flipped the switch. The lights were on in room 3116. Don't freak out. Maybe someone new moved in. I watched longer than I should have. I don't know why I'm so nosy. Always try and get to the bottom of everything. I watched and waited for any sign of movement in room 3116. I never saw a soul in there. At some point, the big coat lady came out of the building with her dog, and for some stupid reason, I felt compelled to go talk to her. I just need to be sure of something. I walked casually down the sidewalk, waiting to run into her again. I was going to ask her if she had a lighter, and then I was going to ask her if she had any information on room 3116. Eventually, she reappeared around the corner with her feisty little dog walking on its hind legs, strangling itself with the leash. I was leaned up on the wall next to the door I had snuck in weeks before, waiting to say my line. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you have a light?" She looked up with confusion. "Like a flashlight?" she asked. I flashed my carton of cigarettes. "Oh, no, honey. I've got asthma, sorry." "No problem," I muttered back. I tried to come up with anything else I could say, so I could eventually segue into room 3116. Blanking, I simply stared ahead in disappointment. That's when I noticed a faded bloodstain on the sidewalk from the old man. I clicked my tongue. Terrible what happened. I muttered. The big coat lady turned around and saw what I was staring at. Understand immediately. "Ugh, I know. I'm up on the 13th floor, and I heard the sound." She was slowly nodding, and now staring at the old puddle of blood herself. "I heard someone talking about how they already moved a new family into that unit he was in. Is that right?" I asked, surprised at myself. "Oh, no. I think they're letting it sit like they did with the last one," she said, my brow raised. I tried to not act like an insane person and scare her off. "The last one?" I asked hesitantly. "Yeah, it was just a few months ago. Or maybe it was a year now. But the young couple that lived right next door to him jumped out the window too," she said in a flat way. I could have fainted. I felt dizzy and clammy. But I tried to keep my calm demeanor. "That is, wow. I'm pretty new to the building, so I hadn't heard." I stammered. I resigned from my niceties, and my eyes went out of focus as my mind began jumping to its newest conclusion. Somewhere in my peripheral, I noticed a lady nodding and looking down at her scraggly dog. "Well, it sure is hard out here these days," she said, breaking the silence. She shuffled through the heavy apartment door, which slammed behind her, startling me, torn from my trance. I quickly retreated back to my apartment. Shit. What does this mean? That rolling square thing lives in that room, and what? Kills people in it and around it? Do the people kill themselves? Does the thing maybe inject them with something that makes them, I don't know, suicidal? Or Maybe they go crazy and just jump. I was thinking like a fucking lunatic. Like one of the cracked out vagrants wandering through the abandoned motels back in my hometown. I tried to slow myself down, but now I've been given perfect evidence to suit my paranoid suspicions. At first, I was just trying to solve this complex series of events. Then I remembered I was involved. I remembered the switch plays a role in this whole thing. The light switch in my home theater. How far can it move? How far? Could it cross the street and climb the stairs and break in? Maybe it's quiet, or maybe it has some kind of way to silently open my door. So I don't notice. So the neighbors don't notice. I found myself back in the home theater with some cheap whiskey in a plastic bottle. I sipped on it and enjoyed the aromatic sting that made me slowly feel braver with every gulp. I looked up at the 31st floor across the street. The lights were still on in room 3116. They're probably just cleaning it out. You need to calm yourself. None of this is your problem. I felt better and braver still with every new swig of the cruel whiskey. At some point, I hovered my hand over the light switch. The dwindling sobriety in me said no. The courageous drunk in me said, I'm just curious. My sight was beginning to sharpen and blur, and I could tell I was swaying as I stood in front of those windows. I was drunk enough to where I felt like an observer of a faded memory from the past. I was drunk enough to where any action felt insignificant, and all would be fine, because nothing mattered. I flipped the switch, expecting the lights of room 3118 to blink on. The lights in room 3116 turned off instead. Shit, I don't know why, but seeing those lights turn off made me duck and hide below the window. I felt like I woke the rolling thing up, and now it could see me. Shit, it moved. It fucking moved. Logic and reasoning was now out the window. The lights magically switch rooms, and I can only imagine it's because the square rolling thing now occupied, or will now materialize, inside of room 3116. I continued hiding and thinking horrible thoughts to myself. I then did something I would have never done had I not been wasted. I grabbed a hammer and smashed that fucking light switch. I smashed it into a million pieces, and then smashed those pieces into dust. I'm sure my neighbors were fuming, but I had been quiet as a church mouse up until tonight. Both room 3118 and 3116 now had no lights on, and I had made the drunken assumption that now they were both safe. This all began when I turned the lights on in 3118. Now the lights would stay off forever, and I made sure of it. Clearly I didn't have the self-control to stop myself from tinkering with this unknown thing. I doubt anyone else who would live here would have much more discipline. So I smashed the fucking switch into a million pieces. It wasn't long before I blacked out. Something woke me up hours later. It was deep into the night. I was still in the home theater and still drunk, but now also hungover. I tried to pull it together enough to figure out what woke me. I had thought it was a loud sound, but maybe it wasn't. The air felt like something loud had just occurred. But that was just a feeling, maybe one of paranoia. I looked out the window and half expected to see another person or persons lying smashed on the ground after diving off the 31st floor, but I saw no such horror. Both 3118 and 3116 lights were still off. I rubbed my eyes and looked around the pitch black room. I felt my blood freeze. There was a light on in my apartment. I could see the thin sliver of yellow illuminating underneath the door of the home theater. It's in. I wanted to run at first, but then I wanted to sit still and just listen. So I sat there waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for me to make a move. Then I heard it, muffled, maybe in the kitchen, rolling. Finally, I could hear the sound in finer detail. The wheels sounded heavy, like the sound of stone tomb opening. The cheap hardwood floor buckled and cracked underneath those giant rolling wheels, which must have moved extremely slow and calculated, as if it was listening for my heartbeat. I was frozen with fear and confused. So confused. What kind of nightmare has my life become? I wanted to try and make a break for it. I thought about running as fast as I could down my awful hallway and ripping that front door open. It was only a few quick strides away. I sat up a little too quickly. Adrenaline was kicking in. A spring in the shitty secondhand recliner. I had passed out on popped, causing an insignificant yet audible click throughout the house. Rolling followed. It was very slow, so slow that one's ear could lose a deep droning tone after long enough to background noise. I slowly sat back, and the recliner crinkled ever so softly. The thing made a noise so intentionally imperceptible I could hardly make it out. A metallic sliding sound. The sound of a door's latch being methodically opened. It was leaving the kitchen, and maybe it was moving onto one of the other doors now. The yellow sliver of light went out, and the apartment was now totally dark. Rolling persisted, and I was barely able to perceive the noise. I spent the next few minutes sliding off my recliner with the precision of prey which I undoubtedly had become. 30 minutes could have passed before I crawled close enough to see under the door's crack. I carefully positioned my left eye to where I could see out into the black hallway just enough. Something impossibly dark. Darker than the natural blackness of night. It was just sitting in the hall, waiting. It was large and boxy, just like that silhouette in 3118. It looked to almost perfectly fit the dimensions of the hall, leaving me sealed in. I'm dead. Maybe not. Maybe I can call the police or something and distract it. It'd kill them, though, right? Then I'd be a murderer, maybe? Or maybe it would roll away. Maybe it isn't bulletproof. I can't have anyone else's blood on my hands. Maybe I can start a fire somehow, and then the fire department will be able to rescue me from the window? Maybe that's the stupidest thought I've ever had. Too much noise. I can't make any noise. I can't make a sound or it'll come get me. My thoughts were so frantic and visceral. I feared even they would make a sound which could be intercepted by the masterful listener sitting mere feet away. Another 30 minutes of eternity, and I had silently made my way towards the large windows. I was so cautious and so deliberate in my movements as to not touch the tiniest plastic shard on the ground from when I had drunkenly destroyed the light switch. Maybe I made it angry by doing that. Maybe, in breaking the switch, the thing reverted back to me? Or maybe I exposed myself to it when I smashed that switch. I tried to use my phone and call for help, text for help, fucking email for help. None of it was going through. That damn rolling demon must have jammed my signal somehow. I ran out of hope. I froze in place. Eventually, I just started to write all of this. I'm still in the home theater, typing all this out on my phone as quietly as I can, even sipping the last of my whiskey with the most delicate swigs one could imagine. This whole thing is rather bleak, and I apologize if you stumble across this. I've scheduled this post to go up in 8 hours. Maybe by then the thing will have left and my final words will get out into the world to be forgotten or laughed at. I'm sure you think I'm insane or maybe I'm just a liar, and that's okay. I know what happened here tonight. I don't know how or why any of this happened, but I know the rolling thing outside my door is real. I don't know why it's here, what its motivation is, if it's man-made or some impersonation of something we'd engineer, or maybe it's the very muse of humanity's chase for right angles and industrial design. I now understand how those people in room 3118 and 3116 met their fate on the cracked pavement below. I think it wants me to kill myself. Either that, or it's totally content with me killing myself. It's had me trapped in this room for hours now. It could have barged in and flattened me at any point, but it hasn't yet. Funny how this all started in this damn extra room of mine. Funny how these windows are the ideal design and size for me to throw myself from this hellish place. I don't know anymore. At this point, I'm just trying to buy time and sip more whiskey before the inevitable. I had been distracted in writing this for a few hours, and it even began to hope that when the sun came up, the thing would roll away. All I'd need is a few minutes to get out. I don't think I'm so lucky, though. The sky is beginning to brighten into a deep blue, and onk again I hear that stead die rolling. So slow and meticulous. ITT must only be moving a centimeter every 15 minutes. The whiskey is his doing job, and it's becoming hard to type. Harder to maintain literacy. I think nigh. Hello, wrap this up here. I'm sorry, everyone. I can only hope this is seen. And if you did see this, I thank you for keeping me company, in a way. The sun's almost up. I hear rolling in its clothes. The view from the window is very nice. It's looking like a nice day. I hope it is a nice day. Story 8. What's your scariest hostel experience? I'm Mahamudul, and this story takes place back when I was in 11th grade. I spent that entire year living in a hostel. There were 4 sections in total, and I stayed in the first one, right next to the staircase and the bathroom. Our room had 13 of us packed in together. Most nights we stayed awake until 1 or 2 in the morning, then had to get up by 6 when the hostel super would come around to wake us. He wasn't exactly the nicest guy, more of a strict, bitter type, so we'd often mess with him. At night, when he was asleep, we'd knock on his door and run away, or throw little stones from far just to annoy him. That was our usual hostel life. But then, things took a very strange turn. One night, while I was in our room studying, a group of my friends were in another room, coming up with a new plan. They wanted to scare everyone by pretending there was a ghost in the hostel. I had no idea what they were planning, because after finishing my studying around midnight, I fell asleep early. Later that night, something woke me up. I felt someone tugging at my toes. At first, I thought I was just dreaming, but then it happened again. Someone was actually pulling at my toes while I was lying in bed. The third time it happened, I quickly pulled a blanket off of myself and looked. What I saw made my heart sink. Across the room, I saw a tall figure, wearing a long white kurta, swaying its arms slowly as it walked. My blood ran cold. I shook my friend Diderot, who was lying next to me, but he brushed me off, saying I was imagining things and told me to just sleep. I pulled the blanket over my head, terrified, and tried to sleep again. But soon after, I felt the same thing, that tugging on my toes. This time, when I pulled the blanket away, I saw it clearly. A tall man in white was standing right next to my bed. I panicked and grabbed the hand of my friend Mamoon, digging my nails into his skin out of fear. My friends never admitted anything to me that night. They just let me stay scared. I barely slept until morning. When the sun came up, I told everyone what had happened. They all laughed at me. Some were curious, but most found it funny because they were all in on the plan. I told them I wanted to go home and leave the hostel. I was serious about it. A couple of days later, they tried it again at night, and again I was terrified. This time, they couldn't hold back their laughter. They finally admitted it was all a prank. But the thing is, even now, years later, I still remember that night, because for at least one of those times, I know it wasn't a prank. Story 9. The Bone Archives. What I'm about to tell you is true. I know every narrator says that, but this isn't just a story for me. It's something I lived through. The events I'm about to describe happened years ago, when I was working in the library archives. I still don't know if I'll ever be the same. I'm telling it now in the hopes that speaking it aloud, putting the memory into words, might help me cope with the weight I've carried since. The Bone Collection. Back then, I was working nights as a library assistant while teaching part-time as an adjunct professor in anthropology, specializing in forensic anthropology. The library's basement archive wasn't really an archive at all. It was a dumping ground, uncatalogued donations, water-damaged theses, books no one ever bothered to process, and dust so thick it clung to your skin. None of it was accessible for research. None of it had been touched for years. With my supervisor's blessing, I decided to tackle the chaos during the slow hours of my closing shifts. I imagined uncovering lost treasures, rare books, forgotten research, hidden history. I've always loved archival work. The hours slip away when I'm sorting, repairing, or just sitting with the mystery of old objects. The night I started, the library was nearly empty. I unlocked the archive door and froze for a moment. The room was wall-to-wall boxes, stacked unevenly to the ceiling. Dust motes swam in the fluorescent light. None of the boxes had labels. I realized too late that I should have scoped out the space before agreeing to this project. Well, too late now, I muttered. I picked a box at random. Junk. More junk. A cracked microscope. A stack of outdated journals. I began 3 piles. Trash, possible resources, and unsure. The first night was fruitless. but I told myself there had to be something worthwhile buried in here. On the second night, the far half of the room was plunged into darkness. The lights there had given out. I worked anyway, my shadow looming across the boxes. That's when I found them. Under a stack of broken lab equipment, 8 boxes of plastic human bone casts. Perfectly articulated skeletons. It was an incredible find. These casts were expensive and in great condition. I cleaned them, labeled them, and added them to the library's in-house study collection. Students loved them. For weeks, the bone boxes were constantly checked out. I felt like I'd already justified the entire project. I had no idea that those boxes were the beginning of something much darker. A few weeks later, I decided to check the bone boxes to make sure all pieces were intact. Most were fine, just a few stray sternums and scapulae to return to their proper sets. Then, in the last box, I found it. An extra bone. It was a clavicle. Real bone, not plastic. From an adult male, by the size and shape. Bleached, smooth to the touch. We did not, under any circumstances, circulate real human remains in the library. They're fragile and require secure storage in a departmental bone room. I was the only staff member trained to tell the difference between plastic and real bone. So whoever slipped into box had either done it deliberately or without understanding what it was. The bone's presence made no sense. The boxes never left the library. No faculty had requested real remains. The only explanation was that someone brought it in and hid it there, or that it had been in archives all along, waiting for me to find it. I removed it from circulation immediately and emailed my colleagues. No one knew anything about it. When I checked the system, that particular box had been used by over 15 students just that day. There was no way to tell when or by whom the bone had been added. I told the student assistants to start counting the bones before closing each night. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the start of something. The next afternoon, I had replies waiting in my inbox. Nothing. No staff member or biology faculty had touched the bone boxes. The biology department's inventory was intact. I put the matter on the library meeting agenda under the title, Human Remains Found in Basement. When I explained the situation, Sylvia, the media supervisor, frowned. Why does this even matter? Isn't it a waste of time? I stared at her. Finding human remains without documentation is a legal and ethical problem. If we can't identify the source, we have to notify the police. Sylvia scoffed. How do you even know it's real? I reminded her, again, that I teach forensic anthropology, that I could tell without question that it was real bone. The meeting ended with no resolution. I left feeling dismissed, gaslit, as if I were overreacting. That night, I went back to the basement. The lighting had gotten worse. The single working row of fluorescents flickered and buzzed, leaving the far corners in shadow. I joked to myself as I stepped inside. Hello, creepy basement. Never change. I opened a few boxes. Junk, more junk. Then something caught my eye. A stack of microfiche with the labels almost entirely worn away. Just a faint number, 9, on one strip. And then I saw it. In the far back corner, half hidden behind a leaning pile of boxes, was an older box. Heavier, damp along the bottom. The cardboard soft to the touch. A thick layer of dust coated the lid. When I opened it, a fine, gritty powder clung to the tape. I leaned closer. It wasn't dust. It was bone dust. Tiny, jagged fragments were scattered inside. Under my flashlight, I could see the telltale honeycomb shape of trabecular bone. Some pieces were so small they could have passed for sand. I dumped the contents onto the floor, my breath shallow. Mostly broken slides, metal scraps, and then my fingers closed around something larger. A bone fragment, smooth in some places, porous in others. A metatarsal, maybe, fractured into pieces. The air in the basement felt heavy, close. My neck prickled as though someone was standing behind me. But I was alone. When I came back to work after the weekend, I went straight to the bone boxes. I'd only been gone a few days, but there were 3 more bones inside. 1 true rib, a sacrum, a scapula, all of them prepared the same way. Bleached, cleaned, display ready, like they belonged to a research collection, but the sizes varied. One was juvenile, the others adult. My stomach turned. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Someone knew I'd found that first clavicle, and they were sending me more, piece by piece. Either that, or someone was offloading their research collection in the strangest, most unsettling way possible. I put the bones in my desk drawer with the others. I'd investigate further before going to the police. I needed to clear my head, so I headed back down to the archives. My project had been neglected for weeks. I told myself a few hours of organizing old books would calm me down. The lights were worse than ever. A dull, erratic flicker that left the far corners in shadow. Fuck, I muttered. Of course. I didn't feel like trekking upstairs for a proper flashlight, so I made do with the one on my phone. I worked for a couple of hours, sorting ruined books into piles. Most were worthless, mold-eaten, warped, or brittle enough to crumble in my hands. Then I saw it. The dust on the floor had been disturbed. Not just disturbed, there was a footprint, too large to be mine. Only the dean and I had keys to this room. A chill rippled through me. The footprint led toward the far corner. I forced myself to follow, careful not to smudge the edges. A stack of boxes sat there, the top ones coated in thick dust, but the layer on the side facing me had been brushed away. I pulled on gloves. The top box was full of damaged books. Silverfish darted between the pages, their translucent bodies catching the light. Ugh, fuck, that's disgusting. I shoved the box aside and reached for the one underneath. The moment I lifted the lid, I gasped, "What the fuck?" I sank down hard onto the floor. The box was full of human remains, bones of different sizes, different people, all carefully cleaned and prepared. And suddenly I knew I'd found where the bones in circulation were coming from. I took a deep breath, steadied my shaking hands, and dug deeper into the box. At least 4 skulls, fully intact, which meant at least 4 separate individuals had been disarticulated and packed in here. I knew the law. Undocumented human remains are illegal to possess. I needed to contact the police immediately at the university. Everything had to be cataloged, provenanced, and stored and secured in a bone closet or at least stored in a locked room. The fresh footprints told me someone had moved this box recently, and they had to be the same person slipping bones into the student collection, feeding them to me one piece at a time. As I pushed the box back, something caught my eye. A faint groove in the floor. A hatch. That didn't make sense. The basement archive was the lowest level of the library. Why would there be a hatch here? I hooked my fingers under the ridge and lifted. It came up easier than expected, heavy but not stuck, as if it had been opened not long ago. A rusted set of steps led down into blackness. I pointed my phone flashlight into the space, expecting a crawl space. But it was bigger, much bigger. Cobwebs draped across the opening like curtains. The air was damp, tinged with the sour scent of old dust and metal. I climbed down slowly, each step creaking under my weight. When my feet touched the floor, I stopped breathing. Rows of shelves stretched into the darkness. Each shelf was labeled with dates, and each held human remains, carefully laid out clean, tagged. The dates spanned nearly 70 years. Adults and children. Skulls, femurs, vertebrae, all arranged with clinical precision. A hidden bone archive. This wasn't an official collection. If it were, it wouldn't be buried under the library, invisible to the institution. Whoever did this knew exactly how to prepare and preserve bone, and wanted no one to find it, unless they wanted me to find it. The dust toward the back of the room was disturbed. Something was there, a cracked, peeling Gladstone bag, its brass clasp partly open. I crouched. The bag's leather was damp and cold under my fingers. Inside, old medical tools, their steel mottled with age, and on top of them, a folded scrap of paper. The ink was still wet. It smeared as I unfolded it. Story 10. How I came to encounter he who exists outside time. It is with great sadness I recount such events. That such timid behaviors could result in a knowledge that is so catastrophic hardly seems it could belong to a family line that I am part of. but I always was a cuckoo's child, so it makes a bit of sense that I was to remain ignorant of it. In the year 1955, my great-grandfather and grandmother Henrietta and James Grayfallow got married. They, of course, were related second cousins. But even as I scanned the vague photos, such a queer unease surrounds them. The monuments that decorated the halls were ones I had never seen before or since. They varied in shape so much that it would take too much time to remember and describe them, but one that struck me the most was this one that had great gray horns and the face of a dragon, eyes deep black, despite the statue otherwise being made of white marble. Even through the picture, I could feel its eyes meeting mine. My mother alleged they were the true shape of the angels, but if it was something truly benign, I wouldn't have had words to write. Another thing, the people at the wedding were dressed in long black robes with their faces hidden, and each held a flame rather than something like flowers. Following their marriage, they moved into a seaside town. This was a place I'd visited in my childhood many times, and each time I did so was most unsettling. There never seemed to be more than a handful of people out despite the town's circumference being quite large. Each time we crossed them, they always smiled at us. My young mind perceived them as mocking, but now that I have had time to reflect on these memories, it almost seems like they were giddy or eager. The town also had this queer ability to shift. One shop would be in another place. A street would be there that wasn't there before. At one point I remember walking in between two buildings, and there was a room that shouldn't be there between them. Its width was greater than the space that should have held it, and yet it fit comfortably between two buildings. There was no curve to the buildings it was between, and by all means the edges should have cut into it. But how do I describe it? The edges were visible all the way to the ground, and so were the walls of the room. There was nothing making its way for it, though there should have been. I know this isn't easy to visualize and it's hard to explain, but it was the first hint about this town that I began to perceive as unordinary. After their marriage, they had two children, my Uncle John and my mother Alexandria. In the year 1975, my uncle would take his own life. He'd break into a public pool with a gallon of gasoline and threw it into the pool. He set himself ablaze and jumped in, and as he burned, he was calling out the words, "They're trying to drag me to the sea." All I can dream about is him. This was when he and my mother were visiting England, thinking a change of scenery would help him. He'd been going through a severe bout of depression and paranoia and had already tried to take his life previously. It was a whole spectacle, even made the news. He wasn't the only one to die. The majority of the people inside also perished with him. At the autopsy, there was something odd in his brain. Another pair of eyes grow in the frontal lobe, and a pair of metallic silver horns in the parietal. This last bit of news did not reach American soil, and was covered so well it hardly traveled outside the town of Fairbury, where the coroner resided. He took his life fairly recently, in the year 2012. In his suicide note he wrote the words, "I see what the boy was talking about. I have gazed into the nebulous eye of him, and he stares back at me, and I know what the word fear means for the first time. He is not something that should exist." I can hear his song, piercing and malevolent as his gaze. "Wanda, my love, I can only hope he doesn't lay eyes on you." Speaking of which, when I took a job at a nursing home, hopeful that I would find answers to a myriad of questions that plagued my mind, and being hired due to my experience at various hospitals, I had an opportunity to speak to Wanda. I asked her about her husband and who he was, and she burst into such hysteria that I worried she would pass at the very moment. When she told me get out, it was in a voice that was not her own. Back to my mother, for that is where this tale continues. Now she and my grandparents have always had a strained relationship, and I believe it started around the time my uncle committed suicide. He had been the favored one, and they had treated him like the prince that he was. They hadn't intended to send her off to a prestigious college, but as my uncle had no need of his college fund, they sent her off for a career. She became a medical doctor and moved to Australia, where she met my father and the two got married. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. In one of her years in college, she and some of her friends decided to use a Ouija board. They were at one of her friend's house for her birthday party and were, aside from the woman at the party, all alone. Now, whenever my mother touched the board, she smelled a faint scent of the sea, and this was very strange as the house lived nowhere near the ocean, and any lakes were miles off. But she and her friends kept playing until the board eventually spelled a series of words. "I can see you, Amy. And then the board flew through the window and the power went out. My mother and her friend became aware of something wet, sounding running loudly down the hallway, and then the door burst open. In the darkness, the woman beheld the presence of something that was not human for the first time, and were frozen, too terrified to move, until the sun rose, beholding nothing in the open air other than the damp, dark, wet footprints that were not shaped like anything humanoid. That takes us to the year 1985 and my birth. My first ever memory, much later of course, was being laid gently in water, and whether it was a baptism gone wrong or some other such thing I was entirely unsure. But I nearly drowned, and when I did I remember hearing this noise, not a scream, more like a discordant harmony. I was pulled out just before I passed away, and I beheld the eyes of my mother. The look in her eye was one I always remembered. It was one I will never forget. I didn't know how to explain it at the time, but if you were to ask me now, it would be the face of someone thinking, what did I just do? Throughout the course of my life, my mother showed signs of mental illnesses. Whenever she was at work and able to distract herself by being busy, she was for the most part fine, or so my father, who was a surgeon, said so. When she got home, however, she'd do things that creeped me out, especially when I was younger. I'd find her standing in odd positions, gargling salt water or humming. Sometimes I'd see her in the dark and not realize it was her at first, standing, soaking wet, murmuring in a growling tongue that did not sound anything like her. In the daytime, she was paranoid and anxious when we were with her, always looking over her shoulder as if something was watching her, sometimes telling me to stay away from pools or gasoline. Her odd behaviors did not cease as she aged and only grew worse. She at one point, though being far too old to have children, began to think she got pregnant again and told everyone she was. She kept thinking she was going to have a son, and around that time, I remember a large number of people coming over to our house. These people were descended from people who were friends of my grandmother's, and though they had maybe met my mother once or twice, were staying the nights at our house, and every now and then I'd wait to all of them over my mother, singing her praises and kissing her. I remember they were tattooing these symbols on her in veal blood, and she kept them on for weeks at one point. My father at this time was overseas, fighting in the Gulf War, so he had no idea any of this was happening. I was too young to explain exactly what was going on to him, and my mother, who I was scared of at just 6 years of age, was always there whenever I was talking, so I had no real way of telling him without jeopardizing my safety. But just before my father returned, it all ended one morning when they realized my mother wasn't showing any signs of pregnancy. She still got her period. She was not swelling at all. Finally, the jig was up when they went with her to the doctors and found she was not pregnant. When she got back home, there was a change in her. She stopped this paranoia and the staying up at night and was acting normal. This didn't last long. She had spells of anger that came and went, and they were so intense it led to my father divorcing her and him taking me and leaving. What became of my mother? For a while I did not know. My life progressed as you might expect. No other strange things happened until about a decade and a half after I got out of nursing school. In that time I got married, pregnant, and divorced. I had a son, Julian, and a daughter. My father passed away. He worked as a deckhand for a large company and made a solid amount of money. When he fell off the boat and drowned one afternoon, things began to change one night in the middle of September. Julian was 3 at this time, and he woke me up after a long, tiring shift. I was not pleased and ready to snap at him when he said something that made me stop, cold. "Mommy, Titi, there's someone outside the window," he said. He was shaking and at the verge of tears. "She looks all big and gross, and she's been making this weird noise." He opened his mouth and began making this low, croaking noise that occasionally stopped for maybe a second before going again, almost like a frog we were biting. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand right up. I reached into the nightstand and pulled out my firearm before rushing to his bedroom. I hoped she wasn't really there. I hoped it had been a nightmare or some other such thing, but when I stepped into his room, I saw her. She was so white she was glowing in the gloom, and she looked like a bloated, dead corpse, rotted for years. And she had broken through the glass and was standing in the middle of the room. When she saw me, she opened her mouth wide and began to make the noise, extending one long pointer finger directly at me. She started running to me and Julian. I pulled the trigger. Once, twice, till it was out of ammo and clicking dead in my hands. The bullets went through her, but did not stop her advancing until she was within kissing distance. I could feel her raw coldness against my skin. I could feel her sweet, musky, horrid breath into my nostrils and on my tongue. And then she was gone, just like that, as if she had never been. I'm sorry. I don't think I can continue tonight. I have more stuff from this point on, but writing it is something I cannot bring myself to do. Later, maybe, but not now. Story 11, Naughty Boy, the game that doesn't exist. My name is Gabriel, and I've been collecting retro games for over 10 years. It's not just a hobby, it's almost an obsession. I drove for hours on end just to pick up a scratch cartridge. I spent more than I should have to get Japanese editions of obscure titles. But nothing prepared me for what happened the day I found Naughty Boy. It was a sultry Sunday afternoon. I was walking through an old neighborhood, one of those that seems to have stopped in the 80s. The window of an antique store caught my attention. Record players, wooden radios, porcelain dolls, and in the corner, a box full of PlayStation 1 games. My eyes lit up. I entered. The air inside smelled of old wood and mold, and the sound of the creaking door echoed through the silent space. Behind the counter, a thin man with pale skin and deep-set eyes greeted me with a small smile. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, as if he already knew what I was looking for. I started looking through the box. Most were well-known titles: Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, Gran Turismo, until I saw something that made me stop. The cover was strangely beautiful. A boy with mischievous expression, half of his face illuminated by an intense red light, and the other half immersed in a deep blue shadow. The background looked like a night park, with rusty swings and slides. The title came in big letters, as if it were made of chalk: Naughty Boy. I had never heard of this game, and I know practically the entire PS1 catalog. I turned to the seller. This game here, do you know where it came from? He looked quickly at the cover, then at me, and replied in a low voice, "Better not play for too long." Then he smiled, or at least tried. I thought it was just a weird storekeeper joke. I bought. The price? 13 Brazilian reals. Strange number, but I didn't question it. I got home and carefully cleaned the disc. The CD was completely black, with no name, just that dark reflection. I put it on my unlocked PS1 and waited. The home screen did not have a Sony logo, just one sentence, in white letters on a black background. The game starts when you look. After that, soft music started playing. It sounded like music from a children's music box, but out of tune, with notes that sounded wrong. The menu had two options: play and watch. I found it curious, but I chose play. The screen loaded a rudimentary 3D scene, the same park as on the cover, but with thick fog. I controlled a boy in a striped t-shirt. There was no HUD. There was no clear objective, just the possibility of walking around the park. With every step, I heard muffled giggles, but they weren't from my character. They seemed to come from outside the TV. I continued exploring. In the corners, I saw a figure standing still, a little blurry, as if they hadn't loaded properly. When I tried to get closer, they disappeared. After a few minutes, I noticed something. The laughter was getting louder, and the game camera would sometimes turn on its own to show something behind me. But when I rotated the character, there was nothing. I played for about half an hour, until I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold. The boy in the game had started to exactly imitate my movements with controller, not just walking and jumping, but also the pauses, the hesitations, as if he knew I was trying to understand what was happening. I hung up. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the game. When I slept, I dreamed of the park, always in the same spot, facing the rusty slide, and someone always out of focus, watching me from a distance. I decided to play again, but that time, when I called, there was no menu, just the boy standing in the park, looking straight into the camera. He smiled, and he said my name. "Hi, Gabriel." My heart raced. The PS1 didn't have a microphone. There was no way to know my name. I continued. Even though I was shaking, the boy started to walk, and I realized he wasn't controlling anything. It was as if the game had become a video. But little by little, the camera moved away from him, and revealing that behind was my room, with the same wall, the same shelves, the same PS1 on the table. I watched, transfixed, as the boy turned toward the bedroom door in the game. Just as he put his hand on the doorknob, someone knocked on my real door 3 times. Slow, I locked the door and turned everything off. I spent days avoiding the console, until, on an idiotic impulse, I decided to go back to the store and ask the salesperson about the game. But the store was no longer there. In place, an empty space, full of dust and cobwebs, as if no one had entered there years ago. Confused, I asked a man at a nearby bakery, "The antique store?" Son, that place closed in 1998 when the owner died." My stomach turned. I had bought the game 2 weeks ago. I returned home stunned. I needed to confirm that the disc was still there, but when I opened the box, there was no CD, just a folded piece of paper, in my own handwriting. The game starts when you look, and at the end of the room, coming from the corridor, the box music started to play.